Receive a warm greeting. Welcome to one more conference of this self-knowledge course. The topic we will study today is titled The Difficult Path and the Christic Work. A topic of vital importance for our progress on our inner path, since this path is certainly very difficult. However, knowing beforehand what obstacles make it difficult will allow us to advance at a good pace and achieve the goal of intimate self-realization of our being in one existence. The path to self-realization is difficult. Without a doubt, the path that leads to enlightenment is not an easy path to follow. It is really very difficult, otherwise the vast majority of us would already be awake and enlightened, since without a doubt in many of our multiple existences, we have had the knowledge of the path that leads to self-realization. However, we are still here, asleep and lost. There are many reasons why this path is difficult. The main one I would say is the fact that to travel it, we must constantly confront and defeat ourselves, and that is the hardest war. This path is known as the path of the razor's edge because it has dangers on both sides, and each step brings pain. Many begin this path, very rare are those who reach the goal. Although it is a difficult and painful path, it is undoubtedly the only one that is really worth traveling. And this is because its final point is total liberation, the awakening of 100% of our consciousness, and the return to the bosom of the common cosmic Father. But now, having achieved wisdom, mastery, and having become creator gods, to be part of the army of the voice, or the great word that resonates throughout the universe. In this conference, we are going to understand why the path to self-realization is difficult, and we are going to learn about some obstacles that we are going to encounter when we undertake this path. We will also see how to transcend those obstacles, and we will talk about how to avoid possible forms of self-deception that could prevent us from moving towards self-realization. So, let's analyze what those obstacles are that make this path difficult, so that we learn to transcend them and advance in our inner work. The first obstacle that we are going to encounter is our own ego, and more specifically that dark side of ourselves that we don't know or don't accept. As I told you, the most difficult thing is to face ourselves, to decide to discover and recognize that we are not as good people as we think we are, and that to truly know ourselves we must open ourselves to discovering the perversity that resides within us. We love our ego very much, we justify our mistakes, we overlook many very perverse details that manifest in us. And we reach such a point of self-deception that we don't see or recognize our own psychological defects. We barely know a very small part of ourselves, since our sense of self-observation is very atrophied due to lack of use. We get used to looking outside all the time. To point out, criticize and judge what others do, without realizing that we are only projecting that unknown side of ourselves on other people, but we are not willing to recognize it in ourselves. And it happens that, when one has many things in oneself that one doesn't know or accept, then those things complicate our lives terribly. And thanks to this, we live attracting all kinds of circumstances and people that generate conflicts into our lives. Since, if we are not well related to ourselves, we will not be well related to others either. And the result will be conflicts of all kinds. When we want to embark on the path of self-knowledge, which is undoubtedly the only path that can lead us to enlightenment, we then understand the need to observe ourselves. Self-observation is bringing the light of consciousness to that dark side of ourselves. When you start observing yourself, you start to discover many things that you didn't even suspect you had inside. We begin to discover that we are liar, lazy, treacherous, unfair, unbalanced, tyrannical, dishonest, cruel, ill-intentioned, weak, perverse, morbid, degenerate people, etc. And to the extent that one brings more light into that inner darkness, one discovers deeper and more difficult things about oneself, which are scary, and which cause us, due to our self-pity and our overflowing self-love, to flee from inner work. This causes us to leave behind the work of psychological death, and decide on some other path that promises us heaven or enlightenment only by believing in something or someone, by attending certain meetings, consuming some substance, or giving a constant number of financial contributions to a religion that promise us heaven. A famous psychoanalyst said that no one becomes enlightened by fantasizing figures of light, but by becoming aware of their own darkness. And it is that trapped in all that subconscious aspect of ourselves is 97% of our essence, and only by observing our inner darkness, or ego, and eliminating it, can we truly rescue and awaken our consciousness, which is the light. And, therefore, achieve true enlightenment. If we don't decide to begin this work of self-discovery through self-observation, we will spend another existence believing that we are doing very well and believing ourselves to be victims of circumstances and people. Seeing the perversion outside, but never recognizing it within us. And that is the second aspect that makes this path so difficult. The fact that we don't accept that what we criticize so much in others is something that lies in the dark side of oneself, and that one doesn't know, nor does one want to recognize. The ego is offended when it sees its reflection. It is important then to reflect that we will never feel the need to change if we are convinced that the bad guy is the other, that the pervert is the other, that the corrupt are those in the government, that the degenerates are those criminals we see on television, or on YouTube, but that we are blameless and honorable. And we don't even remotely want to see that what bothers us so much in others is just an aspect that has not been worked on in us. And we can discover this in the fact that we don't have the slightest understanding in relation to it, since it is our own defect, repressed within us, that from the other pole points, judges, criticizes and feels rejection towards that, which we see in that mirror, that is presented to us in the actions of other people. And this is a great cause of stagnation in inner work, because we understand that we don't need to change, and that the one who has to change is always the other. When we see something in another that bothers us, that generates rejection or irritation, let us remember the law of the mirror that tells us that everything that bothers me, irritates me, makes me angry, or that I want to change in another, is within me. And through self-observation we seek to discover the hidden defect within us, which is often repressed by the personality. But we will undoubtedly find many details in which this defect is constantly manifested through our centers. Then we can begin to know ourselves, transform ourselves, and understand and forgive others. The third aspect that makes this a difficult path is the fact that it is a path full of dangers inside and out. When we begin this path, we want to separate ourselves from the sinister forces that want to keep us asleep and fascinated in order to continue feeding on our energy. When they notice that we want to free ourselves, then, the Black Lodge, both external and internal, comes against us. Our own psychological defects, which are our internal Black Lodge, are going to wage war on us. They are going to generate a lot of ill will in us so that we don't do the practices. Bad will so that we don't abandon our bad habits, so that we don't achieve chastity, etc. They will also activate constant desires that we will have to overcome. In addition, as we advance, the temptations will become stronger and stronger. Since, only by denying all these desires of the ego, is how we can rescue the light and fire trapped in each of them, and the stronger the temptation, the greater the reward we will receive if we refuse the desire and eliminate the psychological self. But it turns out that this constant resistance that the ego will make us is not all, we will also receive external attacks. Immediately a person stops fornicating, balances his centers, manages to light the sacred fire, and receives his little silver sword in the astral world, the Black Lodge comes upon him to try to take it away from him. They will try to make him lose energy, lose strength, and return to be another battery entity in society, so that all the sinister and parasitic forces continue to feed on him. And these attacks will come by many means. Will come as attractive people, who will seek to seduce us so that we fall into temptation, and so that we fall in being unfaithful to our partner, and so that we return to fornication. Will also come as people with very fascinating theories that seek to confuse and mislead us. They will come as guides, they will pretend to be masters or gurus whom we must follow to advance. Or as people who bring us great economic opportunities, that will solve all our problems, but will leave us without time and energy to do the work of our inner being. That is why we have to be very alert and practicing psychological death at all times and in every situation, so that consciousness constantly manifests in us, guiding us through intuition. We must know that the external Black Lodge can only tempt us through our internal Black Lodge. What does this mean? That, if we are eliminating from our interior the lustful, unfaithful, fanatic, mythomaniac, intellectual, envious, proud, greedy selves, etc., then the external Black Lodge will have no way of seducing us or making us lose our way. Another great obstacle on this path is self-deception. That happens when we enter these studies and begin to feel that we are good people, to feel that we are already safe, to feel holy, and to believe that we have the truth. Also, when we learn these topics and believe that by handling them well, we are already better than others, and we even see those who don't recognize this knowledge as inferior to us. It even often happens that the person begins to work on himself and realizes that he has many psychological defects, that he must stop wasting his energy and bravely begin to do the inner work. Then give up some of his vices and eliminate some of his defects. The person can even begin to teach others this knowledge, achieving some inner advancement. But then, he begins to enter a state of passivity, in which he begins to feel that he is doing very well, that he is already awake, that he is doing what he had to do, and he lets his guard down. He doesn't realize how the egos of self-deception are taking away his strength. He loses the revolution and stagnates indefinitely on the path, until he gradually ends up losing all strength. And we must keep in mind that, on the inner path, when one believes that things are going very well, in reality they are going very badly, and when one believes that they are going very badly, it happens that they are going very well. Because when one thinks that things are going very well, it is because we have entered the path of fanaticism and mythomania, we have lowered our guard, we have stopped observing ourselves, judging ourselves without mercy, and thus we have stopped discovering ourselves. A person who begins to discover his own inner darkness, to discover his own rottenness and inner misery with the purpose of rescuing the light trapped in his own darkness, and who doesn't hide from it, but rather delves deeper and deeper into more subtle and perverse aspects of himself, will live in constant self-discovery. And that's why this work must be constant, and it doesn't end until it ends. The moment we begin to feel good and elevated, to feel awake and superior to others, it is because we have strayed and taken the path of self-deception. A person who is in constant self-discovery will become increasingly clear about his need to change, and how much he still needs to work on himself. Even in the second mountain of initiation, the Christic force that is born within us must continue to eliminate all that dark aspect of our psychological moon, and must put an end to the 7 causal selves, or capital sins, that originated our entire ego. So, feeling that we are great and that we are doing very well, when we have barely begun this work, is a terrible obstacle to our progress. Another obstacle that we find on this path are the moral codes. In society there are many moral codes, rules of conduct, civil statutes, rules of civility, religious rules, etc. And it turns out that all these moral codes on the inner path are superfluous, and many of them can become a terrible obstacle to our inner work. Conventional morality is useless. Morality is a slave to customs, time, and place. What was moral in past times is now immoral. What was moral in the Middle Ages for these modern times can be immoral. What is moral in one country is immoral in another, etc. So, after a person begins to do the work to awaken his consciousness, he must be governed by his own consciousness. Consciousness is timeless, it is always objective. In society we find, for example, precepts that tell us that we have to study to be someone in life. And following that established code, we spend a large number of years of our lives in basic preparation, then secondary, then university, then postgraduate, masters, specialties, etc. All this to have a job, try to get money, comforts, give ourselves luxuries, have prestige, etc. However, All of these are just personality objectives that will not lead us to develop anything permanent or transcendental, since all material achievements and successes are swallowed by time. When we die, they stay. The only thing that transcends time is the consciousness we awaken. Therefore, by following this pattern so defended by the moral codes of society, we waste all our time pursuing subjective things, and don't dedicate our existence to achieving its true purpose, which is achieving the intimate self-realization of the being. Even having already received this knowledge, many put it aside, just to comply with those social precepts. In the same way we could analyze many moral codes, like that the family is the most important thing. And by following this, we close ourselves and limit our love only to the family nucleus. We forget that everyone on this planet is our brothers, and we don't sacrifice ourselves for others. Other society codes tells us that we have to be believers of a certain religion, or that we have to obey the rules imposed on us by the government in charge. And so, many pre-established codes that are an obstacle when we want to take the path of awakening our conscience and following the dictates of our inner being. If we don't decide to always follow the dictates of our own consciousness, beyond what the leaders in power consider to be correct, we will end up making many mistakes that can even damage our own energy, or permanently prevent our process towards awakening. Another aspect that makes this path difficult is karma. We owe enormous amounts of karma. Every time we let our psychological defects act instead of our conscience, they generated damage that has left us with many karmic debts. Throughout our existences we have harmed many people, we have committed many atrocities, and if we want to free ourselves, we must settle accounts. The divine law is fair, but also merciful. It requires us to pay the pending karma of the last 7 existences, in order to self-realize. Therefore, on this path we will always be paying karma, and every time we eliminate a psychological defect, we must pay the debts that it generated. Hence the importance of living constantly working in favor of humanity, to constantly generate the Dharma that allows us to pay our debts with acts of love, so that we no longer have to pay them with pain. Sometimes the Dharma we do will not be enough, and we will have to go through moments of crisis, illness, pain, and difficult situations. But we have to be clear and aware that this is a necessary process on this path. It is important to constantly carry out the practice of transferring funds and negotiating with the law, which we learned in Lesson 13 of this course. This, to be able to pay our debts daily, and thus alleviate the pain of karma, so as not to get stuck because of this along the way. Another difficult obstacle that this path has is pseudo-esotericism. In pseudo-esotericism, we find many paths that promise to take us to some higher goal through contact with spirits, contact with extraterrestrials, by taking mystical drugs, consulting shamans, sorcerers, masters, through the development of faculties, through beliefs, etc. Then we see that there are multiple paths that lead nowhere, some of them even lead us to the abyss and despair. There are paths that aim to take us towards nirvana, and to become majesties of such or such areas of the universe, but that in no way would bring us back to the bosom of the eternal common cosmic Father. And we really must have our eyes wide open, since there are very fascinating paths, of most holy appearance, ineffable, but unfortunately, they can only lead us to the submerged involution of the hellish worlds. Let's remember that the path that will take us back to the Father is only found within us, and that we can only enter it, and advance in it, through the practice in our lives of the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. And finally, among the obstacles that we will encounter on this path are the tests to which the initiate is constantly subjected. When one enters the path of initiation, when one is already beginning to work, a series of terrible tests come to us, because they have to test the initiate in every way, to see if he deserves to continue climbing or not. And we are going to be tested daily. It is a rigorous discipline. To obtain good results in these tests, the psychological work of psychological death is essential. They will give us tests of earth, water, air, and fire. We are going to experience them both in the astral world and in the physical world. With these tests, we will be measured by the wisdom, righteousness, and love with which we can face the different situations that arise in our daily lives. How we react to economic complications, if we are able to adapt to different life circumstances, how we face the loss of something or someone, how we deal with situations where lust or anger arises, etc. If we become desperate, if we don't know how to adapt to different situations, if we react negatively, we will not pass the tests, and we will remain stuck along the way, since the tests define our progress. There are moments of trial in which we feel alone, in which we ask and receive no answer, in which we feel that we have entered a desert, and our being has abandoned us. But these are only tests where our ability to follow the path is measured. As we have seen, this is a path with many dangers and obstacles, and it is necessary to know them to know how to transcend them, and not stay stuck. There will come a point along the way, during the creation of the causal body, after having chosen the direct path, when we find ourselves in the most difficult moments of the work, in the moments of maximum suffering and conscious sacrifices. It is at that point where the Christ in us will be born. And although the Christ is that revolutionary force that will come to help us so that we can do all the work of the second mountain, which is the work of the inner apocalypse, his arrival marks the beginning of the truly difficult path. If, faced with the guardian of the world of will, we don't decide on the direct, narrow, and difficult path, it will not be possible for the individual Christ to be born. And it turns out that of 1,000 initiates who reach that point of deciding the paths, 999 take the path to nirvana, instead of the direct path, thus betraying their inner Christ. We find here that the temptation of nirvana is one of the greatest obstacles we will encounter in our progress towards self-realization. The Father can only be reached through the Son, but for the Son of Man to be born in the heart of man, he must renounce nirvana and decide on the direct path, thus uniting himself with his divine soul. The Christ is born from the union of our human soul and our divine soul. The advent of the Christic fire is the most important event in our own lives. The intimate Christ then takes charge of all our mental, emotional, motor, instinctive, and sexual processes, as the electronic Kundalini ascends. By taking charge of all our psychological processes, the Lord of Perfection suffers unspeakably. Becoming a man among men, he must go through many trials and endure unspeakable temptations. Temptation is fire, triumph over temptation is light. The initiate must learn to live dangerously, that's how it is written. The work of the second mountain is arduous and intense work, because it is the process through which the Christic fire within us will help us to completely purify ourselves and completely free ourselves from the ego. Among the works that the inner Christ must do on the second mountain are the creation of the bodies of gold, indispensable so that the Christ force can come to incarnate in us, since incarnating it is the fundamental thing in the advanced work of the elimination of the pluralized self. He must also pay all karma, including hard karma, which must be paid with pain, as it is related to the crimes we have committed against the Holy Spirit. He must also eliminate the causal selves, or seeds of the ego, which is to clean our inner stable of all those beasts that we have been creating and feeding through the centuries. And it must also take charge of world teaching. As we see, the work that the inner Christ must do in us is quite arduous. But there is one aspect that will make the work of the inner Christ more difficult, and it is that the whole world will see him through their psychological glass. He, being perfect, when he gets into us, he would seem imperfect. Being chaste he would seem as if he was not, being fair he would seem as if he was not. This is similar to the different reflections of light. If we wear blue glasses everything will appear blue to us, and if we wear red glasses, we will see all things of this color. He, even being white, seen from the outside, everyone will see him through the psychological glasses with which they look at him. That is why people seeing him, do not see him. Each one will reflect their own defects in the Christ. No one will understand the Christ, that is why people will judge him, and if possible, they will seek to attack him. The Christ will not conform to moral codes or good customs. The Christ is the truth, and the truth is always offensive to people. In reality, if we had a Christ in front of us, we wouldn't recognize him. The Christ manifest, and yet hidden in the heart of the real man, by taking charge of our various psychological states, being unknown to people, is in fact described as cruel, immoral, and perverse. Unconscious and sleeping people only want a historical, anthropomorphic Christ, of statue and unbreakable dogmas, to which they can easily accommodate all their clumsy and stale moral codes and all their prejudices and conditions. People can never conceive the intimate Christ in the heart of man. The crowds only worship the statue of Christ, and that's all. The work that the intimate Christ has to carry out within our own psyche is frighteningly painful. Truly, our inner master must live his entire way of the cross in the very depths of our own soul. However, when the Christ completes the work, we will no longer have to feel pain or persecution, we will have freed ourselves from all the ego, we will have transcended all the laws that subjected us to this mechanical wheel, we will have rescued all the wisdom that we came to seek in this physical experience, and will no longer be bound by laws and pain. The invitation is for us to reflect on the importance of this path, and understand that all these obstacles can be transcended, because we are not alone. Our inner being and many higher forces are from the internal world supporting us, and giving us strength to take each step. We invite you to the next conference, in which we will reflect on how to stop becoming identified with the events of our daily lives, and why that is so important. And we will also delve into the reasons why we always judge others instead of judging ourselves. We will see the importance of combating these two errors so that our consciousness doesn't fall asleep, and so that we recover critical judgment. Remember to leave us any questions or comments you have. Until next time.